Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Empire. Today we sit down with Harry and Steven, founders of Arbitrum. We are recording this at about 11 p.m. at night. Super long day for them. They just announced their airdrop today. This episode, there's going to be two Arbitrum episodes today. This episode is all about two things. One is Orbit, and two is their airdrop that they announced. So really interesting episode. I think you guys will enjoy this. Stay tuned later today. We're going to drop another episode with Harry and Steven that we recorded a week or two ago, all about their thoughts on Arbitrum versus Optimism, the ZK competitive landscape, MEV on Arbitrum. So that's a really interesting episode that we recorded before I even knew the airdrop was coming. So that'll drop later today. But this episode right now, I think you guys are going to enjoy it. It's all about the airdrop, all about the decision-making behind kind of decentralizing Arbitrum and what that looks like, as well as Orbit. So yeah. Without further ado, let's jump into it. Harry and Steven, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Absolutely.
Big day for you guys. You announced the airdrop, obviously. You also announced Orbit. So two huge announcements in one day. I just want to actually start with the why. And I remember, I think maybe a good place to start is I remember actually a couple of years ago, you guys being pretty aggressively anti-token. And that has obviously changed. So I just want to get your guys' view into why embark on this super tough journey of launching a token. Maybe, I don't know who to throw that to, but I'll let one of you guys take this tough question.
I think Steven, you normally...
Yeah. You definitely, you're onto something there when there definitely was a time where, and actually I saw people post screenshots here from, I think, an old Medium comment that I'd made, and basically it was from 2019, maybe early 2020, where someone asked, is there or will there be a token? And basically Ed answered truthfully, which was our thought at the time, that there are no plans to have a token, and I didn't think there would be one. So definitely as a company and as individuals, I think our thoughts have evolved on this. And the thing I'll say is our opinions have always come from a place of technical merit and technical considerations first, right? When the question was, does it make sense to have a token technically? Is there a technical reason to have a token in the Arbitrum network? And I think that's where our thoughts evolved. That's speaking for myself, I think speaking for Ed and Harry as well, that's where our thoughts have always begun. So initially we said, we thought, Arbitrum doesn't need a token. That was probably our thought in 2018 and 2019. But also our thoughts of what a layer 2 is and what this network looks like and what it processes changed as well. If you go back to the earliest descriptions of Arbitrum, we thought about it basically as an app chain model where everyone sort of launched their own chain, and on their chain they had their own application, and it was almost like a per application one application per chain. And then it makes sense to not have a token necessarily, because it's sort of, each one is very contained and you don't need that. But in the model where there are these big public chains, and the question is who controls these chains, the case for a token, the case for decentralization becomes much clearer. It's either we don't want centralized control, but there's common ownership. So the case for a token becomes much clearer. So I think it really was over time, as we understood how people are going to use this technology, that the idea started simmering in our head of maybe a token does make sense. And I think over time that really coalesced in our minds, but it was never, it was always technical consideration from the beginning.
Is it fair to say just further decentralization of the chain of the ecosystem? Is that the kind of core decision?
That would have been the concise way to say what I just rambled through.
Let me ask the much more important question. How much sleep are you guys running on these days?
Not so much. I'm looking forward to the weekend.
I had a lovely sleep between 3:45 a.m. and 5:45 a.m. last night.
Nice. Wonderful.
Nice. Steven, are you over or under that?
Under that right now.
That's what I had to imagine. Okay, so
I guess I really is railing on. No, I'm just joking.
the why here makes sense. Why now? Go ahead, Harry.
The why a little bit, just the other kind of, and just to put a concrete point on it. I think kind of the linchpin of all of it is upgradability. The linchpin of all of it is basically okay, we have the system, either it freezes forever or there's some way to change it. If it freezes forever, it won't be the best tech forever. I think like we for a long time believed that like no roll up tech around today is going to look particularly good in 5 or 10 years. Like all these projects are going to keep innovating, keep growing. And like the flexibility for like projects to sort of improve and adopt new technology is critical. But simultaneously sort of having it be centralized is just like not feasible. Like kind of having it be sort of, if you want to be able to change, you need to choose who can do that changing. And fundamentally at a system of kind of the kind of insane scale that Arbitrum is running at, like it has to be widely controlled. It can't be sort of tightly held and kind of come through on the promises of what it should be.
And by the way, when it comes to upgradability, it's not just, I think I agree with Harry that you want, from a feature set perspective, you want the ability to upgrade a chain. And indeed, Arbitrum upgraded to the Arbitrum One network, upgraded to the Arbitrum Nitro stack earlier this year. And that was, in a world where that capability didn't exist and was sort of stuck in time, I think it would be very, very different. And I think that the chain would have a lot more difficulty succeeding long term. But also, even if you disagree with that, like, no, it's okay, we don't need any new features on this chain. Just from a security perspective, let's say there's a vulnerability discovered in the code, and the chain, if it doesn't have upgradability, won't even be able to fix that vulnerability. So fundamentally, it's like to upgrade the chain to new features and also to protect it in case of any bugs discovered in the code of the chain. I think it's very important to have the ability to upgrade. But as Harry said, you have this catch-22. Okay, so we want someone to be able to upgrade this, but we don't want there to be a centralized party. And the way out of that is to say, okay, so it's the community, literally the DAO, it's everyone that has the ability to upgrade it. So you sort of have both the upgradability, but also not that don't have that in the hands of any centralized or single entity or individual.
Okay, so the why makes sense here. Why now?
Basically, if you look at the history of the chain since launch and the upgrades that have been made, it kind of makes sense. The goal is getting rid of points of centralization and getting rid of single points of failure or single points of control that rely on one entity or one individual. And there are a few points, if you look at the system, in the abstract, there are a few important parts to decentralize. One is it's important to have fraud proofs on the chain. These are the sort of proofs that connect the glue the chain to Ethereum, right? That actually give it a security of Ethereum. It's critical to have those fraud proofs live in the system, because if there are no proofs, the chain can't operate by itself. It requires centralized intervention. It doesn't rely on the security of Ethereum. But that's step one. So Arbitrum has been fortunate since day one of its testnet launch to always have fraud proofs. You also need to have the bandwidth to actually meet the demand on the chain. I think 2 nights ago, there was a sustained period of time where there were 40 TPS on Arbitrum. There was some sort of unusual behavior going on to get it that high. But the idea being, the Nitro software has the capability of handling both the traffic today as well as significant traffic to come over time, as well, and it also reduced the cost. So Nitro was an important upgrade that was necessary for the long-term health of the chain. And then, so the question is, so we have then the next thing that we announced was that there were about a dozen, 10 to 12 institutional validators, including big names like Unit410 of Coinbase, Consensus, Google Cloud, the Ethereum Foundation, were actually participating in the decentralization and the validation of Arbitrum One. That's another point of centralization that Arbitrum had gotten past, right? Fraud proofs are nice, but the second part is who's running these fraud proofs. And so in November, just a few months ago, it was announced that now, but many independent organizations now have the capability, have been whitelisted to run these fraud proofs. So naturally, if you look and say, okay, so what's after we have the Nitro upgrade and fraud proofs run now not by 1 or 2 nodes, but by a dozen or so independent nodes. Now, what's next? What's the biggest point of centralization? It's clear the biggest point of centralization is the ownership of the chain, is the ability to upgrade the chain, and that's what today's launch solves. It takes the base. There is a progressive process where a lot of these different points of centralization have gone away over time, and some remain. It's a continuing process. The biggest one left was clearly the centralized control over the chain ownership. And with the launch of today's token, that has been given over to the DAO. So that centralized chain ownership of Arbitrum 1, Arbitrum Nova no longer exists. And we're significantly further on the path to decentralization.
I have kind of like complementary, I guess, point here, which is basically that I think I'm really, really, really happy that we didn't do something like this a year and a half, 2 years ago. That like fundamentally, it's interesting the degree to which kind of decentralization is great from a sort of security perspective and from kind of an inclusiveness perspective, but in terms of kind of efficiency, it's not the best. I mean, I think this is where we look at where you look at like Ethereum itself, and it both simultaneously takes a long time to get there and a lot of coordination, but the result is amazing. And that's the sort of thing that you kind of have to do when you are established, when you actually sort of have a sort of polished product and are just sort of improving on it and iterating it, as opposed to sort of in that like early flexible sort of young startup that is kind of moving fast and sort of developing in a kind of much more controlled way, where there's kind of an enormous benefit to sort of having centralization from the level of being able to kind of develop faster. And so like having something that sort of, I think that like to me one thing I looked at a lot is the kind of rate of upgrades to the system that we've been deploying has massively slowed down since Nitro. And kind of the longer it gets, the less often we've upgraded, which is really to me kind of symbolic of the fact that it just doesn't need as many rapid changes anymore, which is kind of the right time to move over to a more deliberate process.
Which is the goal of a protocol. That's great. How did you guys decide? You guys should fact check these numbers here, but the numbers I'm looking at are the treasury got 43%, the team got 27%, investors got 18%, and users got 12%. How did you guys decide on the allocation?
So I think principle number one for us was that it should be majority owned by the community, and that's the rough breakdown is like 55 point something, almost 56% to the community, and 44% to insiders. When you look at the larger chart, so that was probably the most important aspects of that for us, just the overall community dominance of this. And again, as you pointed out, so there's the user airdrop, there's the DAO airdrop. So those together are like what's been given to the community immediately, and that those together are 12.75%. But then there's that DAO treasury part, which is also belongs to the community, but is controlled by the community and will have opportunities to be distributed by the community and by the DAO in the long term. So that's the most important one to us. And then when it comes to the airdrop, right, there was some freedom. So there's sort of three different criteria when it comes to the airdrop that are like, I don't know, I feel like we should define another trilemma here. The idea being there are three things you could do, right? You can give away too many tokens, right? You have freedom over the size of the airdrop. You have freedom over, so how many users of Arbitrum, did anyone who ever used Arbitrum get airdrop eligibility, or is it more selective than that? And then you have freedom over, and how many tokens does each person who's eligible for the airdrop get? And you sort of, these things are in tension with one another, right? If your goal is to preserve, not to give the entirety of the user, of the community allocation out on day one, then you're limited, then you can't make the airdrop too large. And then you have to say, okay, so do you want to give everyone very, very little, or do you want to sort of select on a more power set of users, or users that are more committed and give them a little bit more? And then, users who use Arbitrum once or twice or have some simple behaviors, they'll get eliminated. And that's basically it's sort of the set of constraints when doing that. So we worked very closely at Off-Chain Labs with the Arbitrum Foundation and with Nansen on this over the course of many, many months, analyzing the data and working on this, and really tried to optimize for giving a reasonably large amount of the tokens to the community for preserving some. So 12.75, that would sound like that felt in the right ballpark. It's a lot of the tokens going out the door on day one, but there's still a significant treasury remaining, and also trying to focus on finding the real users of Arbitrum and eliminating the symbols and the airdrop farmers and giving them more representation than just trying to flat give everyone just touch Arbitrum. Because the thing about Arbitrum is, the airdrop happened. There's a lot of users, right? There are millions of active addresses. It's the chain has already has significant traction, and that's great. But also when designing an airdrop, it makes it a little bit tricky because again, you really want to focus on that set of users. You don't want to just give everyone some dust. You want to basically focus on that set of users. And I think we together with Nansen and the Arbitrum Foundation, I think we did find a good medium there. But that's basically there's no exact science, but those are sort of the factors of that went into determining the size of the airdrop.
Yeah. Do you have any projections on short, obviously medium to long-term usage of Arbitrum? Both of your vision is that it skyrockets. Do you have any sense of short-term usage of Arbitrum? Because obviously there's a lot of use. Arbitrum is ripping in terms of on-chain usage recently, but obviously some people are just trying to farm for the airdrop. Do you have any sense of short-term usage, what that could look like?
So, it's hard to know exactly, to be honest. One thing we can confirm is, so the airdrop and eligibility were announced earlier today, and Arbitrum's traffic did not, go down. There's still a lot of real and sustained use. Yeah. And one thing which is important to notice is the traffic is elevated on many metrics, right? Arbitrum is now, I think last time we recorded, I said it was number 2, but now it's sustained number, and then we looked, it was number 3 that day, but now it's sustained number 2 index value right behind Ethereum. It's the number 1 TVL layer 2. It has the most ETH in Arbitrum than any other than all the other scaling solutions combined. Many metrics are up simultaneously, which is indicative of real and actual use. And people are building protocols in Arbitrum that have product market fit, and people want to use. So I don't think we'll see a decrease in traffic. I think we'll see an increase in traffic because I think a lot of that is real and legitimate traffic. Although we don't have, other than generic growth projections, we don't have anything specific that will tell us in the short to medium term what factor increase we expect of the traffic. But we did have a few weeks ago, for the first time, Arbitrum processed more transactions than Ethereum in a single day, and I expect that over the course of the next weeks and months to become the norm.
To the degree that there is artificial usage, which I'm sure there's been some amount, and we know from the Sybil elimination work that was done for the airdrop certainly that there was a good chunk that was detected. I personally would be really excited about that dropping off, because I think fundamentally one of the things that Arbitrum I think has been pretty successful at is finding real product market fit, which is incredibly hard to do when you can't tell what usage is organic and what isn't. And given that the goal is to grow the pie, the goal is to onboard more users, more developers, trying to understand what people actually want, as opposed to kind of what they're doing because they have some sort of side motive, is just so important and valuable.
I hadn't thought about it like that. Yeah, I guess if people were listening to Blockworks podcasts and opening Blockworks' newsletter simply because they were trying to get a reward from it, it'd be really, from a product perspective, it would make it very tough to actually tell, well, are we putting out good content? Do people actually like this show, or are they just interesting? I hadn't thought about it from that lens. Yeah. Why did you guys decide to make the ARB token only used for protocol governance instead of being used to pay for fees as well? What was the thought process there?
So an Arbitrum rollup, there's a very good technical reason why ETH is the natural fee token for Arbitrum, and the reason is simple. The majority of the cost of an Arbitrum transaction is actually to post the ETH on Ethereum. So what I mean is, if your Arbitrum 1 transaction costs you 5 cents, you're roughly 3 cents are actually just being paid to Ethereum to store your data. I remember in the rollup mode, Arbitrum puts all of the data on Ethereum, and that's a linear per transaction cost, and not something that goes away. It might go down over time with innovations like EIP 4404, but there will always be a linear cost. And what that means is, if you think about it, you can charge fees on whatever token you want, but fundamentally you're taking money in one currency, but your costs are denominated in ETH. And so ETH is the obvious currency, is the logical currency. And if you took funds in another currency, you'd have to do an immediate conversion to ETH, or you'd hold the risk of that conversion. So considering that the currency of layer 1 is ETH and Arbitrum pays Ethereum for its security, it's very natural. And this is just from a technical perspective. And the second one is, in the Constitution, we also have, the Constitution lists several values of Arbitrum and its ecosystem, and one of them is Ethereum alignment. I think from an ecosystem alignment perspective, it makes a lot of sense to use ETH. The goal here is to a scaling solution that makes it easier and simpler for users and for developers to use. And it's clear that, again, considering that users are bridging from ETH and users have ETH, just by nature of Arbitrum being on top of ETH, the least friction thing that one can do is to have our ETH be the fee token in Arbitrum. So again, we're always about tech and what is what is best technically first, and it's clear to us that from both a technical perspective and from an ecosystem alignment perspective, ETH is the right call. So adding something artificial, like saying, let's add the Arbitrum token because artificially that'd be good. Like that's not something which we consider. We just say technically ETH is the best. Community value wise, ETH is the best. So ETH is that's enough to sway us and say we believe that that the token should remain the fee token should remain ETH on Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova.
Harry, anything else out there or no?
No, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Steven summed it up pretty well.
Nice. Guys, it's super clear. You guys, super clear. You've been very, just really thoughtful with how you've done all of this, from spending time with Nansen for months on identifying different wallets that are like actually participating, just the whole way that you've gone about it. What were the toughest decisions that you guys had to make? Like, what were the things where it's 10 p.m., you're at the office, you're whiteboarding, and you're just disagreeing, and you got to sleep on the decisions, and you can't come to agreement? What were some of those?
It's a good question.
You're both laughing and smiling, so I know that there are some. So you gotta. Oh, here.
Yeah, the truth is, one of them, and I don't think it was a point of disagreement, but as you said, we worked together with the Arbitrum Foundation and with Nansen for many, many months on these criteria, and our goal was to create a set of fair criteria, set of open and transparent criteria as well, right? So users can go ahead and verify them, and all the data is their users can say, okay, these are the points that I deserve. I can go and check that myself. This is correct. This is fair. We spent, we put in tireless efforts to really optimize for that. But the truth is, you never really know until you do it, how people will be receptive to it and whether or not people will appreciate the work you've done. People will agree with your criteria. So definitely, those were scary decisions to be involved with, and it wasn't, obviously the Arbitrum Foundation was the ultimate one to make those decisions. But those were there are no. It's not. It's somewhere in between an art and a science. There's no exact answer to this, and you sort of put in the best efforts, and that's what we did. We all did together, and but it was definitely a scary process, and we were just hoping that the community would appreciate it. And to be very honest, it wasn't like we were sure that okay, this is perfect, everyone's gonna love it. We're like, we've done our best here.
Sometimes that's all you can do, right? People forget that at the end of the day, they're just people building startups and technology here. So you just try to put your best foot forward.
Absolutely. And yes, I think people assume that there is a scientific answer, but I don't think that anyone's cracked it. And one thing is, as we were on, it becomes harder over time, right? As the more airdrops come, and then the more of these Sybil farmers or the airdrop farmers or Sybils, they adapt. It becomes more and more difficult over time to identify the behavior, to separate that from real users. And you don't want to go too much in doing this, because then you end up just catching some real users together with the with them. So it's a very, very tricky problem. And unfortunately, there's no always correct answer. There's a best effort job there.
I think the other sort of big element I think I could call out is basically just like the core kind of like getting over the concept of sort of like handing off sort of control of this thing to the Arbitrum Foundation, which like Steven and I are very much not a part of. And just kind of, I think, coming to terms with like what it really takes to kind of make a system really decentralized and independent. It was a really, significant mental hurdle to get through.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, I can imagine that. I was talking to Harry before you jumped on, Stephen, and I think it'd be really tough. Like, Mike and I have been running Blockworks for 5 years, and I think, we're still pretty. There are decisions that we don't make anymore, but it's by choice. I'd say it's because we've removed ourselves from decision making. It's not like there's decisions that like we're actively not supposed to be involved in those because those are the foundation, and like I'm not push those. Like, how do you think about that? Almost from like a, I don't know, like psychological, interesting like barrier and hurdle to get over. I feel like.
Yeah, it's a very strange feeling to have a lot of control over the ecosystem and literally give it up. Even in the Security Council, I'm not a member of the Security Council.
Right, so you have a foundation, and then the foundation has created the Security Council?
Exactly. The Security Council is part of the foundation. But the company, it's a 9 out of 12 signature to do anything fast on the Security Council. The company doesn't have the ability to unilaterally push something through. Offchain Labs doesn't even have the ability to veto something. Offchain Labs has 3 seats there, so if everyone else disagrees with Offchain Labs, they doesn't even have a veto. So Offchain Labs really doesn't have any significant power at all over the direction here, and it's a big departure, of course, and it's definitely I've been doing a few of these press interviews. So someone asked me yesterday, like, why would you do that? Like, and the answer is simple. Like, we can argue today or tomorrow the benefits for centralized systems and the benefits for decentralized systems. And I'm one, by the way, who thinks there are benefits to both. It doesn't centralized. Not one is better. There different ones are better for different opportunities. Centralized systems have their places. Right? Web 2 and Web 3 aren't in competition. They complement each other. Sometimes for some problems, Web 2 are better. For some, Web 3 are better. For some, a combination of the two are better. At least that's my vision. The thing that I think we can't do is to have a centralized product, but call it a decentralized product. So in our mind, the only way to decentralize is actually to decentralize. And giving up control and actually decentralizing, that's it. You can't decentralize, but also keep that control. And for us, it's ironic. We're excited. We're celebrating today. We're celebrating the lack of power and giving up of that power, because it's not about us. It's about the ecosystem and empowering the DAO and empowering the community. And that's a very exciting moment, even if it means that we no longer are in control of the chain. The DAO is in control of the chain, and that's the correct and the next exciting development for the community. And we are very excited to see this thing that we initially created really fly by itself and go beyond our control.
Yeah. I'm guessing you're not. Well, I don't know how much you can comment on this, but one thing I just have to ask about is I don't even know the right way to ask it, but like, okay, so I'm looking at optimism on our price chart right now, and talk about low flow. Okay, so you have 800 million market cap and 11 billion FDV. What do you think I guess how much do you know about the numbers for like when Arbitrum launches, and like what do you think this does like comparably in the markets?
So we don't know or even like really consider what the price will be. That's not something we have any information on or really went into any of our considerations. But one thing we do know and can say is in terms of, I think the ratio you said it was like 800 to 11. We are, as part of the airdrop on day one, we will the Arbitrum Foundation will be giving out 12.75% of the token supply, which is, I think, significantly more than they gave in their airdrop. So that the percentage of the float and the token available on day one will be significantly higher. By the way, investor and team tokens, I imagine in their case as well, in our case, have a 4-year lock with a 1-year cliff. So they gradually start unlocking after 1 year over 4 years, but there'll be absolutely none of that liquidity for the first year. So really, but one important thing is I think the size of the airdrop is sounds like larger than what they have put out.
Yeah. How does So like when you IPO, when a company IPOs, the bankers set a price, right? And they want to kind of like talk to a bunch of institutions and like find the supply and find the demand, like set the supply based on the demand and kind of find this price that's like gets the company a lot of money, but is also going to like rip on day one. What are the mechanics when you launch a token? What is the first price? This might be a really dumb question, but
So probably the answer is it depends on the team and that how they engage or what they engage. We have no idea. We didn't engage with anyone around the price. We didn't actually even engage with any centralized exchanges on listing the token either. This wasn't what we're optimizing for. We're launching the token because we believe in the technical merits of the governance. And so I can't speak for other teams what they do. But I can confirm in our case. Literally have never had a conversation or been in a conversation of what the price would be, and I will be sitting watching just like everyone else and seeing what happens on Thursday when the token goes live. But that's never been our focus.
I don't know if you guys saw the Coinbase documentary that Coinbase dropped like 2 or 3 months ago. They hired a filmmaker and they dropped it on Amazon. Right? So it's actually, I mean, it's a little bit of PR, obviously, but it's a fun little look and inside their IPO and stuff, and like the story of Brian Armstrong. It's basically the story of Brian Armstrong.
But I thought you meant the NFT videos for a second. Sorry.
Oh no.
I don't think I've seen that.
The question is, when documentary about Stephen?
What are you saying?
When documentary about Stephen?
Oh. I'm good.
No, it's not up to Stephen, Harry. It's up to the foundation. But there's a fun video of Brian just like on the day of their IPO, like sitting behind the computer, just like all the rest of us, just being like, all right, there goes the price, out of my hands now. Okay. So
we get engaged.
I want to actually move a little bit away from token airdrop stuff, because obviously that's exciting, but I would a part of me feels like the other news of the day is like just as exciting, but really got swept under the rug, which is you guys just launched Orbit. So my understanding is like this is you guys getting into the L3 space, and like this is this permissionless L3 solution for developers to build on top of the Arbitrum L2. Super exciting. Have a bunch of questions here, but maybe Harry, can I pick on you just to give a succinct overview of it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so the really big change with it's interesting. Kind of most of the things we announce and we do are oftentimes kind of technical changes. Whereas Orbit like fundamentally comes in the form of a licensing change at its core, which is that before now, Off-Chain Labs had just had Arbitrum Nitro code licensed under the BSL. Two big changes happened today. One being the DAO gaining the ability to vote to allow other chains to launch using Arbitrum's technology as L2s on top of Ethereum. The other is Orbit, which you mentioned, which is that the license now just allows anybody to use Arbitrum code to launch an L3 on top of an L2 Arbitrum chain. So that means on top of Arbitrum 1, on top of Arbitrum Nova, as the DAO spins up and potentially votes to allow for kind of other Arbitrum layer 2 chains to be created. That might mean on top of those, and so that it's really the start of something. And it's really I'd say in some ways, like I think there's a fair amount of additional technical work to be done to actually figure out even what the like optimal L3 structure of the code is. It works today, but it's certainly not at a place where I would say it's like completely polished. But what's cool and what's really powerful to me and really appeals to me personally is you can do whatever you want with it. There is this massive growing ecosystem of companies that are kind of building and involved in this space of kind of roll-up chains and layer 3 chains and kind of are building on tech and expanding it and changing it and innovating. And sort of with this change, that is kind of fully embraced by the Arbitrum ecosystem. But in a way that will essentially drive value into the core chain by coming as building as layer 3s on top of Arbitrum 1 as opposed to building on kind of completely unrelated layer 2s where they could instead be kind of competitive.
It's really a framework for creating L3s that's settled to these Arbitrum based rollups. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and it's just it's fundamentally, I think there's a lot of kind of development and tooling that we will do over the course of the coming months to sort of make launching L3s easier. I think that's an area that kind of like around off-chain labs we're really excited about, and I know we're going to be interested in kind of expanding out and making it sort of more accessible and easier to do. But like for now, it's kind of this sort of raw Cambrian explosion where even if it's not polished and ready to go to kind of launch your own L3 tomorrow from a sort of like figuring out all the tech and infrastructure and all of the complexities around it perspective, I fully expect to see hackathon projects springing up left and right that are building on this tech stack, deploying L3s, because it's going to be fun.
Who are good candidates right now to go build an L3?
So there are different profiles. Over the course of the past many months, we had the opportunity to speak with different projects, and I would say there are 3 different profiles of projects that want to build an L3. One is highly successful projects, and one example of one that there was a lot of public discussion around. So where there were Yuga Labs did the other side launch, and Ethereum congested, and people were paying thousands of dollars for these, and there were a lot of people publicly saying back then, and the conversation has continued a lot since then in the public forum as well, which is like, hey, you should have your own L3. But again, the idea is a lot of these are projects that want to remain on Ethereum, want the security of Ethereum, want the community of Ethereum. They want a priority lane on Ethereum. So this is one project. They're just successful projects that need their own capacity and want to have more control over their capacity and not be in the shared capacity network where they're on the public network. Because the nice thing about L3s are, if you use the Arbitrum codebase to build an L3 on top of one of the Arbitrum layer 2s, that L3 has the same capacity as the layer 2 itself. Right, so it's really like you're creating more capacity, right? Mm-hmm. So you can have 2 or 3 or 5 L3s sitting on the layer 2, and each of them have their own same capacity, which is really compelling reason to get that priority lane. So that's one profile, a project that has success. The second profile, and this is something we see a lot interestingly, it's a project that a lot of projects don't have that success today, but they have a vision for that success. So they'll say, okay, we're going to launch on the Arbitrum 1 public network, but is there a path for us that if we get, runaway success, is there a path for us to launch our own layer 3? And that gives a lot of people at ease. So they're like, I'm not going to build a layer 3 today, but I like the fact that I know that should we become ultra successful and have really high capacity, the code is available, the license is there, that we can migrate to a layer 3 should it become available. It's sort of like a fraud proof, to go weird analogy. It's not something you intend to use right now, but it's good that it's there, and it allows you to build it in comfort because that mechanism is there should you ever have to go ahead and build the layer 3 that's there. And the third one, I think, from speaking with different protocols, are chains that really want to enshrine their brand or their token inside the chain itself. So for example, we spoke a lot about our values for our public chains being ETH is the fee token, but other protocols may have a different opinion there and say, hey, we're some DeFi protocol with a token, and we want to run a chain in which the fee token is that token, right? That is definitely something which we've seen over time, where they want to run a chain in which maybe their contracts are somehow enshrined and others can't launch contracts, so they have some chain that's basically application specific and focused on their protocol. So again, an ecosystem which is connected either by the token or by the contracts to their protocol. This is another sort of type of chain that we've seen. But one important thing to say is it's definitely not for everyone. Some of the benefits I think people underrate of the public chains is public infrastructure. Take Etherscan or Alchemy, Infura, Chainlink, you name it. All this public infrastructure exists on Arbitrum 1. And to be frank, it takes some time and some effort to get it there. It's not like a given that these infrastructure providers aren't going to support hundreds of new chains, right? They might support that 1 or 2 or 3 really successful one, but they're not going to support those. So I think developers need to think critically about, hey, do we have a reliance on this public infrastructure? Will we be able to get this public infrastructure on our own chain? Did that require a certain level of success? And also, which other applications do I want to be on chain with? Like, there are definitely, we come across projects all the time and say, I want to be in the same chain as Uniswap. I want to tap into Uniswap liquidity. And that's another thing which projects have to consider. Can I live in an island? Because even as in the layer 3 world, there are things that you can do to sort of make the communication between different layer 3s better than just two separate blockchains, but there's still going to be some tension. It's not the same as being actually the same environment, the same blockchain. So I don't think there's a silver bullet here. It really depends on the use case, whether it makes sense for project or developers. But those are some of the profiles of projects that want to build layer 3s that we've spoken to over the past many months.
What's the ETA? So when DYDX moved over announced that it was leaving Starkware, I think it was, and going over to Cosmos to build their own app chain, that was a big moment for like the app chain thesis and Cosmos. When do you think that there will be a DYDX-like moment for Arbitrum L3?
So we know of, just by nature of conversations we've had, people come to us and say, hey, can we build layer 3s? And our answer has been, there will be a path to do that. And now that path is clear. We know that there is a significant interest. The nice thing is also, we don't know, there's probably a lot of interest that we don't know about, right? And that's the nice thing about permissionlessness. People will go ahead and build with this technology and do things that we don't know about, we can't guess, and it just enables that innovation. But even just based on the ones we know about, I think I'm aware of one project that's going very, very strong in this direction. It'll probably in the next few weeks announce that they're going down this path. But I would be not surprised at all, considering the permissionless nature, if that announcement is front run and we wake up tomorrow or 2 days or 3 days from now, where there's some layer 3 that's using the Arbitrum technology that front runs any of the ones that I know about.
I feel like that's alpha, Stephen. Harry, do you have anything else to add there?
Well, I mean, I definitely second that. The idea of kind of the idea of the unknowns, that the unknown projects that arise out of nowhere being one of the coolest sort of facets of the blockchain space, where sort of you can make a lot of plans, but then sort of something out of the blue happens and kind of changes all of it. I think the other kind of like I'm from a technical perspective, I'm kind of extremely excited about the idea of sort of L3s as a kind of test bed for new ideas and new technology around EIPs. That kind of fundamentally, I mean, I think it's interesting because there's been a lot of hope for a while on like, well, L2s can kind of lead the way in terms of, ahead of Ethereum development, which has always been a kind of interesting thesis to me. I've never been the biggest fan of it, because if an L2 adopts A and Ethereum adopts B, you're in a horribly fragmented situation. If a chain kind of like that could lead to like Arbitrum diverging from Ethereum in some way that would cause sort of all sorts of tooling to need to support both. If Arbitrum were to kind of lead the pack but then deviate from, have Ethereum not follow. Whereas for L3s, where you have this flexibility of somebody can kind of start up a new chain that's meant to be experimental, that's not meant to sort of collect, not meant to host billions of dollars of value, that's instead meant for kind of developers and users to kind of experiment with what the next generation of technology looks like. There's so much cool that can happen. Yeah.
Why would someone, let's say I'm an app chain builder. Why would I not build on Orbit? Is it because you want to, if you wanted to own like more of the stack, I guess you could say, you'd probably maybe build an app chain in Cosmos land? Is that like the reason to not use Orbit? What's the counter to Orbit essentially, Harry?
It's a good question. I mean, it's certainly, I think Orbit's pretty great.
Not biased at all, but
no bias.
Never.
My kid is cuter than those other people's kids.
Exactly. Well, I do know your T-shirt. If for anyone watching on YouTube, your T-shirt is better than anyone else's. So,
love this shirt. But no, I mean, I think there's interesting balances. I think that that kind of Arbitrum tech and L2 tech is best in cases where kind of you want sort of a real degree of decentralization, whereas I think kind of in many cases, like a kind of DApp, a sort of like Cosmos style chain, you can kind of have, much more arbitrary degrees of kind of sovereignty, which is also possible in kind of in Orbit chains, in Arbitrum chains, but it's kind of almost against the point of what the technology achieves, which is sort of to have kind of like a broadly decentralized system. And I think that there are like definitely use cases that are kind of better in one way or kind of for one, but with one solution or better with the other.
Yeah. How do you see this being different? So there's, for anyone who didn't hear the intro of this, there's an episode 2 coming out later today. We talk all about like different, like the L2 ecosystem and kind of thoughts on optimism and stuff like that. But I think, Stephen, I would throw one optimism question at you right now, which is like, how do you view this being different than the OP stack here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the fundamentally important thing is, Arbitrum is fully built out and has those fraud proofs available to them and has the full technology available. And I think that's, something which someone can build on the chain today, and the technology is fully there, and the tools to decentralize are there. So I think that's definitely important, and probably the largest difference in terms of, there are probably a lot of small differences as well, but I think, fundamentally, in the goal of what we're trying to achieve, they're probably very, very similar. And I think that there's also a lot of unexplored territory, which we'll probably both explore around how you can build ecosystems and connect these chains, both connective tissues in the L3 ecosystem in ways that you can connect L3s closer than different L2s. And we have some ideas there. And I know that they do as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that generally technology-wise develops. But I do think that in the vision, they're probably more similar than they are different in many ways. The technological maturity is probably, in my view, the largest difference. And we're excited to make the Arbitrum stack, Arbitrum Orbit, available for people to use in its current state. And one thing actually, which we said as well, so we've Arbitrum Stylus will become available to these chains as well. Arbitrum Stylus, I think we discussed it in the next episode. I think is the ability that we've developed at Offchain Labs to write contracts in C, C++, and Rust. The DAO will have the opportunity as well to introduce that to its chains, should it choose to do so later this year, and as will any Arbitrum Orbit chain will have the, its decision will have the opportunity to introduce that technology into its chain. And another thing to mention, I think, with the license here, it will be a perpetual license. So chains have the comfort of knowing that if they choose this technology, the license is theirs, and there's nothing that any centralized entity can do to take that license away from them once they start building on it.
The other thing to note here, which is kind of cool, is just like it's all of this. It's funny because I mean you mentioned optimism, and it's certainly they've done a lot in this regard, but sort of ZK Sync is open source as far as I know. Starkware has announced that they are planning on open sourcing. Polygon, I think is their ZK EVM. I think their ZK EVM is open source as far as I remember. It's really kind of a very cool trend, I would say, kind of across the rollup space, but also just across sort of the broad blockchain space, which is just really exciting to kind of see that you see the value that's created by sort of having the kind of open source flexibility. And I know that like in terms of Arbitrum, I think the kind of balance of allowing allowing this sort of broad ecosystem to evolve in ways that kind of drive value kind of into the ecosystem rather than sort of having value escape is a really kind of appealing idea.
Yeah. Well, isn't it? I mean, open source is not just a crypto thing right now. I feel like there's a broad movement in tech with, Blockworks, if we look at our open source stack, you have like Next.js and React and MySQL and even WordPress with our website and Tailwind and Ghost and like we leverage a bunch of open source stuff. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Any last thoughts, guys, on Orbit, Airdrop, upcoming Arbitrum stuff?
I'm just really excited for kind of like, obviously for like our team, this enormous amount of thought and energy has kind of gone into all things associated with kind of Arbitrum and kind of the kind of launch of governance and the handoff to the foundation. So I'm just really excited for kind of like us to be able to really sort of like get our kind of mental capacity and kind of focus back for sort of the broader technical growth of the roll-up ecosystem, which is something I think that we're extremely fascinated with and excited about, and kind of this plays into it. I don't think we got to mention earlier, but one thing we've been talking about some today, which I think is really exciting, is basically this idea of sort of stages of roll-up decentralization. And with the announcement of the DAO and particularly the Security Council, based on this post that Vitalik made a few months ago, which kind of lays out this idea of kind of stages of decentralization, we become kind of the first EVM rollup to reach sort of the second stage out of 3. And I think that I'm really excited about sort of various research project votes that will kind of get rollups to actually kind of fulfill this sort of fully and completely decentralized and kind of trustless future that we're all looking for.
Steven, you want to bring us home, or are you ready for bed?
Sure. No, I always have thoughts. A little bit of both, I guess. I think what Harry said is really right. And one thing that I'd add is, it's kind of a weird feeling, because on the one hand, today feels like a celebration and the culmination of something where, we've been working. I personally have been working on Arbitrum since about 2017 with Harry. Ed's been working on it for a few years prior to that. And even in the company context, we're approaching 5 years where we've been working on Arbitrum. So it's a very exciting moment to see the tech reach the level of maturity that we're able to take it to this level and then really let go. But from the other perspective, it's really the beginning of something new, right? This is the moment where it develops its wings and it flies. And I think this is an opportunity for the tech to fly and reach new heights that it's never reached before and wouldn't be able to reach until it was really, decentralized in this way and more decentralized and going down this path of decentralization. And I think, we already, made these points before, but the community will innovate. There's opportunities now for the community to be involved. The fact that we're not in control means the DAO is in control. And I'm excited to see what the DAO does, how people innovate with the new technology stack that's becoming, or with the new availability, I should say, of the technology stack that's going live with Arbitrum Orbit, what people, and how the community members become involved. There's now more than ever, we've always said, even, going back years, hey, the community should get involved. There are ways the community can evolve. That's true more than ever. There's a DAO that controls the future of Arbitrum, and community members can become part of that. Next week, community will be, thousands of community members will get a piece of that and get a say in that. And over time, more and more community members will have a say in that governance and a say in the future of the Arbitrum chain. Community members can nominate themselves now to be delegates, and those delegates will be live in the token claiming process next week. Actually, that's why. So the reason why we have a 1 week delay in between the eligibility announcement and the claiming, we're not doing anything. Actually, the smart contracts are already launched. We've given control to the DAO already. There's just this 1 week delay built into the smart contracts, and that's just to allow delegates, the Arbitrum Foundation, to process application for delegates, so delegates can be already in the user flow when users want to go ahead and claim tokens. And delegates, for those who don't know, are the ability for users not to vote themselves if they choose not to, but to delegate their votes to someone else during the claiming process. So there's delegates, there's a Security Council. The initial Security Council has been set up on launch, but in 6 months from now, there will be the first Security Council vote. That's another way where community members can become involved. Just by voting as well, community members can become involved. And there's just so much opportunity. And, one thing which is, again, counterintuitive today. So what is the role of Off-Chain Labs? Off-Chain Labs is a service provider to the DAO. If the DAO wants technical features at the direction of the DAO, Off-Chain Labs can be contracted to build them. I'm excited because I'm pretty sure that in the next few months, it won't just be Off-Chain Labs. There'll be other really great technical teams that are also become service providers to the DAO that also say, hey, we want a grant to build in the Arbitrum ecosystem. And in some sense, this sounds competitive, but from the ecosystem perspective, this is the absolute best thing for the ecosystem. And watching the ecosystem go from a company to a foundation to now hopefully a constellation of companies that are all working together on the same goal, that's really exciting. And to connect this back to Harry's point before, there are times when the tech's not mature, the last thing that you want is too many cooks in the kitchen. Like, this thing doesn't exist. You just need people to close the door and actually build it. But Arbitrum has reached that level of maturity where the core tech is stable and exists. And now we can actually have a process where others can come involved and take, actually build processes. And it might, be a little slower than it would be if there's one, developer behind the closed door building it. But that's a relic of its own success. And that's sort of the next stage here. And I'm excited for the community portion of Arbitrum to start. And can't wait to see the innovation that this will enable.
Nice. I think that's a good place to end it. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode, we have an episode coming out in a couple of hours, Arbitrum Round 2. We recorded it a couple weeks ago before actually I even knew there was an airdrop coming. But Stephen and Harry were generous enough to give us another hour of their time. That episode that drops in a couple hours, we went really deep on their thoughts on Coinbase's L2, deeper thoughts on the OP stack, how they were able to pass ETH in some key metrics, what's going on with MEV on Arbitrum, competing with ZKs, and a whole bunch of other things. So definitely tune into that. Drops in a couple hours. And Stephen and Harry, guys, just really thank you for your time. I know how tired you are and how crazy of a week it's been. So appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.